Hello, everybody. I am Etienne Lecerf, and I'm manager at Marris Consulting. And I am delighted to see that we have people from all over the world. So from New Zealand, from India, from Greece, from the US. So thank you for attending this webinar about solving conflicts when nobody can agree on a common objective. I will let Bill and Thorsteinn talk about this topic. And as you know, Bill Dettmer has written several books about the logical thinking process, about logical thinking and how to use it to improve the strategy and tactics of a company. He works now closely with Thorsteinn Siglaugsson. And Thorsteinn, you're a strategy consultant, and you have recently published a book called From Symptoms to Causes. And now you are both working together to offer coaching sessions within our online training course about the logical thinking process. And you can find several free documents on our platform. I will keep quiet and let Bill and Thorsteinn present the webinar. So thank you.
Okay, well, thank you. Well, let me start by saying welcome to our first webinar. Today, I'm going to address the question of an evaporating cloud with no common objective. As Goldratt originally conceived the evaporating cloud, he assumed that both sides in a conflict, a disagreement, or a dispute would have a common objective, even if that was no more than to see the contention resolved. But an unstated assumption in this structure is that both parties in the conflict are likely to be part of the same system. And that system would have a single objective or goal, which would make it common to both sides. But what if there is no common objective for both sides? How could this happen? Well, the answer to that is it could happen easily enough. Our organizational systems are comprised of smaller systems called people. Each person is a system unto him or herself, each with their own distinct goal, a personal goal. And personal goals almost never coincide with organizational goals. So as soon as you have a person within the organization working on achieving his or her goal, it's inevitable that what they do to achieve their goals will eventually conflict with what they're called upon to do to achieve the organization's goal. Let's look at an example. That example is the Unocal oil refinery in El Segundo, California. Unocal Corporation was subsequently bought by Chevron Oil, but the refinery still operates there under the Chevron banner. In 1995, I was teaching a master's degree class in systems management in El Segundo for the University of Southern California. Although the curriculum was a university-approved curriculum course, I had set aside 20 minutes at the end of each class meeting to introduce my students to aspects of the logical thinking process. My topic for one particular night was the evaporating cloud. After I completed my presentation, along with an example, one of my students posed a question. What do you do if the two sides in a conflict don't have a common objective? That brought me up short. I had never considered that possibility. But I was having a hard time envisioning such a situation, so I asked her for an example. My student explained that she was a chemical engineer on temporary assignment for 2 years to the job of safety officer for the entire refinery. She reported directly to the refinery operations manager. One major part of her job was to submit reports of intensive monthly safety inspections to the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, or OSHA. This was a federal agency commissioned by the U.S. Congress to oversee industrial safety all across America. As it happened, that same day, she had completed the new monthly inspection, and she found 3 serious discrepancies, one of which was critical enough to lead to the temporary shutdown of the refinery until it was corrected. Her boss strongly suggested that she should not report those discrepancies and hinted that her job might be at risk if she didn't do what he suggested. This put her in a very difficult position. Besides wanting to please her boss and preserve her job security, she wanted to avoid doing something that actually was a federal crime. As time ran out on that class meeting, she and I stayed afterwards while I diagrammed her conflict as she stated it. She agreed that the conflict was report versus don't report. I asked her why she was so determined to report the discrepancies, and she said, to comply with federal law. Why did the boss not want her to report the discrepancies, I asked. Wasn't he concerned about plant safety? She replied, not as much as his prospective new job. It's common knowledge that he's in the running for the refinery manager's job with another company in the South Bay area. He doesn't want his boss to know he's contemplating moving, but he doesn't want any blemishes on his record before he gets the job offer. This gave me what I needed to fill in the blocks for the 2 different objectives, the personal objective of the boss and the company objective. Now, the tried and true approach to resolving conflict dilemmas is to separate the left side of the figure from the right side and work exclusively with the right side. It occurred to me that if all the action was going to take place to the right side of the dividing line, a common objective really wasn't indispensable as a requirement. It should still be possible to come up with injections to neutralize the conflict, replacing one or both prerequisites with some third alternative. But it was clear that there was one firm criterion for doing this. The 2 requirements could not themselves be in conflict with one another. As long as that criterion was met, a conflict with no common objective should not be insoluble. The next step in evaporating a cloud is exposing the assumptions underlying each side, each of the arrows in the diagram. These were the assumptions that she and I came up with together. On the one side, a less than perfect inspection score will cost the manager his job offer. Second, reporting discrepancies means a less than perfect score. And third, a less than perfect score compromises a clean record. On the other side, federal law is designed to assure industrial safety. Second, accidents resulting from occupational safety and health discrepancies frequently cause personnel to be injured or killed. Third, it's a felony to falsify OSHA reports. A felony meaning you can go to jail for it. And finally, failure to report discrepancies will eventually be discovered. And finally, the report must be submitted immediately after completing the inspection. Now, the 2 invalid assumptions are indicated here by the red stars. It's clear from the 2 parties involved in this conflict that they have unequal power in this situation. Ultimately, the operations manager can get what he wants. So he's not likely to have to accept the assumption that the risk to his new job prospects might actually be negligible. I asked my student when the report was due to OSHA. She said it was due no later than the last day of the month. So I suggested 2 possible injections. First, tell her boss she'd hold off submitting the report until the end of the month, which was another 3 weeks. Second, she'd submit a clean report if he saw to it that the discrepancies were all cleared in that time. Now, this turned out to be acceptable to her boss, since all the discrepancies could be cleared in that time, even the one that required shutting down the refinery for 3 days. So the lessons I learned from this situation were 3. First, an evaporating cloud can have 2 different objectives. Second, the requirements must not themselves be in conflict. And finally, a true necessary condition relationship is required between each element on both sides of the conflict. That is, none of the relationships can be contrived. So that's it. A conflict with no common objective is resolved. Are there any questions?
Thank you, Bill. This is a very interesting presentation. I always found this case very interesting, and it would be good to have your quick comments on some of my thoughts regarding this. First, what you're saying is that the cloud actually doesn't need a common objective, but at the same time, because we're talking about 2 different systems in this case, actually, this does not have any effect on the requirement for a single goal for a single system, right? The other implication that I see here, which is a very interesting one also, is that using the cloud this way, it expands the usability of it a lot, because like you said in the beginning, within companies we have subsystems which are people, and very often the reason why systems cannot move on, companies cannot move on, are conflicts between people, which are not conflicts at the system level, actually.
That's true.
But between subsystems. And in this way, by opening up the evaporating cloud this way and using it this way, we can probably move a lot further and be more successful with implementing the logical thinking process in a company. What would you say to those?
I would say that your assessment is correct. But the one thing I would emphasize is the fact that it must be absolutely ensured that the requirements that are being satisfied by the conflicting prerequisites are themselves not in conflict with one another.
Yeah,
if they are, then that's the real conflict, not the one that was in the prerequisites.
Yeah.
So you have to be very careful to be sure that the reason that you're trying to achieve one prerequisite on one side is some higher level outcome that is not in conflict with the higher level outcome on the other side. And if you can do that, it's totally irrelevant whether the 2 of them lead to a common objective or not.
Yeah, the objectives actually aren't really relevant, like in this case. It's just the requirements and the prerequisites that are relevant, really.
I should point out something else too, and that is that this particular conflict is a very realistic situation in most organizations. We tend to think of ourselves as team players in our organization, and we're all behind the organizational goal, et cetera, et cetera. But it's human nature that one's personal goals are more important to the individual than the organization's goals. And so you end up with people who are willing to go all the way out to the final stop for the organization's goals until it ends up conflicting with their own goals, or it's going to do them harm in some way. And at that point, you start getting a situation like the one we just looked at.
Yeah, right.
So beware of that in your organizations. People have their own goals, and those goals are more important to them than the organization's goals are. They'll never say that, but you can assume it.
We have several questions. We have a question from Rajiv. Russia and Ukraine are in huge conflict, and they do not seem to have any common goal. Can this issue also be resolved?
Boy, you don't mess around when you're looking for big problems, do you? Could it be resolved? Yes. Is it likely to be resolved? No. The reason it could be resolved, or the reason it is not likely to be resolved, is one of the underlying assumptions of the evaporating cloud, whether it has a common objective or not, is that both sides in the conflict must be interested or willing to see a resolution to the conflict. I do not believe that that is the case in Russia versus Ukraine right now. I think that there are forces at work behind the scenes that do not want to see the conflict resolved. So if that's the case, if you have two sides in contention with one another, and one of the sides, or maybe even both, choose not to see it resolved, it's not going to be resolved. I believe
maybe, yeah.
You can sit there all day, and no matter what, even if you had the conflict effectively laid out for everybody to see, you would find denial by one side or the other, whichever side was determined not to see it resolved.
Perhaps the question to ask here might be rather, because at this point they're at war, but we might ask, if they had used the evaporating cloud, would they perhaps have been able to solve the conflict before they started fighting?
I would say that it's a possibility, but given that the enmity in this goes back centuries, and it is so deeply ingrained, I cannot see that this would possibly have a peaceful resolution. Although I have heard somewhere along the line that Mr. Zelensky early on had expressed a willingness to discuss the issue and to negotiate. And there were other forces behind the scenes that told him not to do that. I don't know how true that is. All I know is that when you get into politics, especially politics that are behind the scenes and not open for everybody to see, the evaporating cloud's utility becomes questionable at that point. It all gets back to the whole issue of both sides meeting with a rational motivation to see the conflict resolved. If both sides negotiate in good faith, sure, you can do it. But it takes willing cooperation by both sides.
Absolutely.
Another question. Is the war an example of the type of conflict which is too intricate and tangled to be resolved by a tool like an evaporating cloud? i.e., what are the practical limits of its application?
Boy, you don't ask small questions, do you? Well, the short answer is that the practical limits to the use of the tool are that both sides are interested in seeing the conflict resolved. They may have different reasons for doing so, but they both want to see it resolved. This is true whether you're talking about management versus labor in a labor contention or a strike. It's true when you're talking about two individuals It's even true when you're talking about international relations between countries. But the fact of the matter is if both sides are sitting down because they have a common interest in seeing the conflict resolved, then the only issue is, what is it going to take to satisfy the hidden requirements of each side? And if you can do that, then yes, you can certainly use the evaporating cloud, whether it's in an international situation or an individual situation. Mm. But as long as there is one side that is determined to see the other side lose, there is no tool that I know of that can be used to resolve that kind of conflict. Now, here's another, we'll call it a complication. If you are the only one that knows about the evaporating cloud and how it works, and you're trying to use it to resolve the situation, you may not be in a position where you truly know what the hidden requirement of the other side is that they are trying to satisfy by demanding their position in the argument. And they may not be willing to share it with you. So you may end up having to speculate. If I were in their position, what would I be trying to achieve by demanding their side in the conflict? And if you can do that, and if it is not in conflict itself with your requirement that you're trying to satisfy, then you can still use the evaporating cloud on your own to come up with ideas that may be acceptable to the other side to resolve the conflict.
Okay. So thank you, Bill. And let me just mention that if people are interested in this topic, we have additional documents and also other documents, free documents about the logical thinking process on our online training platform. So it's logicalthinkingprocess.podia.com. You can download several documents dealing with the logical thinking process and no common objectives. Thank you very much, Bill. Thank you very much, Thorsteinn, for your time. And well, if people are interested in additional content, I mentioned our platform. If they want to be trained by Bill and Thorsteinn, well, they can sign up for our online course.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for tuning in today.
Thank you very much.
Goodbye, everybody.